What's going on, guys? Welcome back. As you may have noticed, there's been a slight gap since my last video. If you see here, we're in a new office. I've officially gotten everything moved into my new place. The office is set up and I'm ready to start kicking out some videos to you guys. Now, this video is not going to be a look recreation as much as me going through and explaining how I actually achieved the look that's already created. And in doing so, I think you're actually going to be able to make a lot of great observations, just kind of seeing my process and how I work through things. And the reason I'm doing it this way is that whenever I'm grading and I'm kind of narrating every step I'm taking, I'm a little bit less likely to experiment and make mistakes, both of which are a huge part of my coloring process. So that look is half of what we'll be covering in this video, and the second half is shot matching. So we're going to take that look, apply it to a neighboring shot, and make the two sync up without destroying the essence of the look we created in the first place. Now, I'll just be sharing a method of shot matching that's been working for me lately, although there's never just one way. So as always, experiment and find out what works for you. Let's dive in. So one of the main things we're talking about in this video is experimentation and shot matching. I see a lot of videos that cover some look creation elements, and that's great, and I want to continue to do that here as well, but I also don't want to neglect what a lot of you request, which is some shot matching techniques. And I've got one method that's been working very well for me, so I just wanted to share that real quick. If you see here, this node graph, we'll walk through it real quick. We'll go over what everything does, just so you guys can kind of see how this look is created. And again, here's the before. That's shot on red, the red wide gamut, log 3G10, and this is where we ended up. So there's a lot of different ways to add contrast, and let's go ahead and disable pretty much everything except for the contrast. We're going to take a look at the way I got the image from log. Here's our log image, and this is where it's at now. So that is a compound node that we're looking at here, and I have this kind of saved as a power grade. If we jump into it, let's show compound node. And this is actually a build your own aces. So you can do it at the node level, not just at the project level, which I brushed on a couple of videos ago. So if we look at this, we'll see our first node, which is labeled red wide gamut to aces CCT. Now, for some reason, I don't have this one labeled, but this is aces CCT to rec 709. So this is that pipeline here. We're taking the red wide gamut, converting it to aces, which looks really weird here. And then we're taking the aces in the last node here and then converting that to rec 709, which is what we're monitoring in, so it makes everything look proper. Now, I don't stop there. I also went into the HDR wheels and just did a little bit of work to kind of bring up some of the shadows in the image. Not a whole lot here, but very subtle. Then we have the primaries here, not doing too much, just kind of leveling everything back out. So we'll jump back into the main node tree and let's continue jumping through this really quickly. Here I have sharp, grain, and soften. Now, the reason I did that sharpening first is that I wanted it to feel kind of gritty and I wanted to add a sharper grain. And anytime you add grain, you really don't want the grain to be much sharper than your image. You want to try and match the sharpness there. So from there, I didn't want the image to actually be that sharp, so that's when I softened it. And this is a very, very subtle thing. We'll zoom way in here and you can see it really doesn't do a whole lot. It's a very subtle thing, but whenever it's blown up, it really makes a big difference. And overall, there's just a little bit different feel, so I like that. And then I also had a pre-node, which is just before that red wide gamut conversion. And here I just did a little bit of work with the primaries just to begin pushing everything into the world I was after. So then we have this primaries node, and I just pushed a little bit of red or warmth into the shadows here, as well as the midtones, and I kind of brought some life back to the warmer tones in the scene. But this node is actually really just prepping a lot of the work that comes ahead in this parallel node right here. So next up we have the curves, and this is the first step in my look creation process. There's not a whole lot going on here. It's just a few adjustments in the hue versus sat and hue versus luminance curves, and then a few tweaks in the color warper just to kind of bring everything together and to start creating a cohesive palette. Then we have our RGB curves and started creating some separation here. And then lastly, we have our log wheels, and this was just kind of balancing out the shadows mainly, and then doing a little bit of work with the highlights as well. Now in our adjustments, here I just kind of took the offset and moved it around and saw where I liked it. And you can see this is where a lot of it starts to come together. You don't always have to go in this order. Sometimes you can do this adjustment node before you start playing with these. But really, I created the DNA in this parallel node here. And then the adjustment node is what kind of ties it all together. And there's not a whole lot here. It's just some offset, a few lift, gamma, gain controls, and then just a custom curve to fine tune my contrast. What I did here was turn on editable splines, and you can see this pops up. That's usually going to give you the most pleasing results. And especially once I've already done my main contrast, I want to be super gentle with that. So whenever you're doing the curves and you're using these editable splines, it's just much more gentle on the image. So next up, we have a glow node, which is something I do almost all the time. There's not a lot of node trees I have that don't have a glow node. And the process there is pretty simple. It's just a glowing image, bring the shine threshold all the way to 0. And that's going to make it look, pretty washed out, not what you want. And then you'll just change your composite type to soft light. And then I went into global blend and kind of brought it to 0 and then dialed it back up to wherever I wanted it. And then I believe I ended up parking it right around 0.55. So next up is this chromatic aberration. And this is really what I wanted to talk about in this video, which is just that experimentation. And you can see here, this is not a heavy effect. It's pretty subtle. But if we zoom in, you'll see some of the edges. That's where you start to get that glow. And the way this effect works is it's an edge detect. So that's the open effect. So if you have resolve, it's going to be kind of built in. And we set the mode to grayscale edges instead of RGB. And this is the color I picked out. If you wanted to replicate it, it's hue 22, saturation 100, and then brightness 87. And this kind of gave it this filmic, like chromatic aberration. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but if you look at some old like super 16mm film, you're probably going to see a lot of this there. So threshold, we have that at 0.110, and then smoothing 0.266, brightness 1.81. Set the denoising mode to sharpen. Be sure to select edge mask overlay, and then denoise strength, have that around 0.18. And then again, global blend, you can dial this back to kind of determine your intensity. And I think I had it right around there, 0.3. So that's that setting. And again, before and after, you can just see it kind of bring some orange glow to those edges. And really you can set that up however you want it. It doesn't have to be orange. It can be whatever you feel is right. Just experiment with it, because that's what I was doing there and I like the results. So lastly, we get into our finishing steps. And this is going to be something, if you have the time to go in and do it on a shot by shot basis, go ahead and do it. It's going to add a lot to the image. Usually my vignettes are to draw attention to the center and to make the edges a little bit darker. But here actually I wanted to lift them up. And then in our outside node, we're kind of popping out the subject just a little bit more. And then lastly, just a few final tweaks with the primaries and the global curves. Here I just wanted to bring down the exposure a touch and give it a little bit more filmic look. And that's really what this does, is not a whole lot to it, just curves and primaries. And that's pretty much the end of that look creation. So once again, before and after, before and after. So now that you guys have seen how this look was created and you see it's pretty much just primaries, primaries, primaries. Overall, it's really quite simple. And that's kind of key whenever we're going through hundreds of shots in a timeline, and we need stuff to copy over pretty easily. So we have this awesome shot right here, which everything looks pretty similar in this one. So you'd think all this look would be able to migrate pretty easily over onto this shot. Let's go ahead and try that. And that is not quite what we're looking for. Everything's really blown out. Our highlights are not where they should be. Neither are midtones and shadows. So what are we going to do to bring this look back in? We can go into all the curves and everything in the primaries. Everything we just went through, we can go in and mess with all the nodes, but that's going to be affecting the look DNA that we just built. So rather than do that, let's go ahead and grab a still from this one so we can analyze how different the two are, and then we'll go into a split screen mode. We have this shot matching node here that's first. This is SM for shot matching, but if we reset it, these two shots, I mean, if you look at the waveform even, they're incredibly different. And let's just start playing with our offset. And as usual, I'll be doing this with my mouse and keyboard so you guys can follow along. I'm just going to pull our offset down, our overall exposure, keeping an eye on the waveform. So overall, that's not too bad, just by changing the offset. And again, that's as simple as shot matching has to be. Another thing I like to do is work with the printer keys or printer lights. And so I have a stream deck in front of me and I'll use that for it generally. So again, in the shot matching node, we can kind of move this around. We can move, really, we're just changing the offset. It's just with printer keys. So we can pull back on our red, maybe not go that far, maybe add a little bit of green, come back on that. And really this is all just experimentation. We're going to see what looks best. That's not too bad. Again, from where we started to where we are now, it's pretty solid. Now in real world scenario, I would move on to the next shot right away and then come back to this later so that the next time I see it, I have fresh eyes. So we're going to bounce out of split screen. We're going to jump into play still mode and just kind of swiping across. Nothing really stands out as wrong. It's not too jarring, bumping from one to the next. If anything, maybe we can come down on our gain just a little bit. I think it's a little bit too hot there. And then in doing so, we're going to pull our midtones up a little bit to balance it out some more. Then we'll go back into split screen just to analyze again. So like I said, typically we'll bounce from shot to shot. So one thing I like to do whenever I'm shot matching is keeping that hero shot up so I can see it at pretty much all times, and make sure that in some way, every image I'm working on kind of ties back in and fits in that same world, at least anytime it should. So let's see, going back to these two. See, now I can tell that the midtones are probably a little bit too cool. So we'll take our gamma here and just warm it up a little bit. Yeah, not too bad. Maybe our highlights can come up a little bit too. Super subtle changes, but yeah, that's the thing. Whenever you work like this, you can do multiple passes. That way, whenever you come back to this image on the second pass, you're seeing it with fresh eyes. So it's gonna be much easier for your eyes to pick up on those changes that you need to make, and then of course, make those changes. And so here, another thing I'm noticing is the skin tones are good, but I think our highlights are still a little bit blown out. So I might even add a second node after this shot matching node, just to bring down some of those peak highlights, those specular highlights. So that's it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys learned something. As always, don't forget to follow me on Instagram to stay up to date on all announcements. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video. And with that, I will see you guys in the next one.